How many people come? Well, now I know some people are out of town.
Not sure.
Huh?
There's also several people that joined with Zoom.
Yeah.
You're ready to start? Just like leave the Zoom and then go back in so the recording can start again.
So, there you are.
Recording.
Did you hit recording?
No, I think the recording should be working. Well, yeah, the rabbi usually like he leaves the meeting and then he goes back in, so the recording starts fresh. So like this whole gap.
Hey, I'll let you do it. I'm not sure what you're referring to. I'll let you-
I think it automatically gets uploaded to YouTube, and then like this whole beginning will be cut off once we do the leave.
Slightly warm in here. No, I mean, it's fine. It's getting there.
Sometimes it's better than others.
You still have to be quiet. Always. When you start cheating. But also whispering sometimes is more of a strain. People think you whisper, but you're really whispering and whispering loud so people can hear you. So it's more of a strain, causing, that's supposed to cause vocal vibration.
That's why people think that rabbis are counselors, doctors, because they know everything. And Thursday makes a week.
Vibration equals friction and agitation. And it doesn't let the wound heal. So it's about 5:30. So do we start or we start regardless?
Good morning.
Oh, so he's
Good morning, Naftali.
good morning. So you're switching it on?
Uh,
I'll do I'll leave and I'll come back.
I hope Hillel is going
We
to
have
do
a
that.
few. We have Naftali
Okay.
and.
Yeah. So what do? You leave and then you come back?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's what it. Okay. Good morning. Before we discussed what happens if a person tells his wife, I'll divorce you, but on the condition that you don't marry Chaim Yankel. Now, the issue is, that's where you left off, presumably. The issue is, the Torah says, V'nosna biyada Sefer Krisus. Sefer Krisus means it's a document that completely severs the tie between the husband and the wife. The fact that he's leaving some strings attached renders the get either questionable or not kosher, depending on the situations the Gemara has been discussing. So here, the Gemara will discuss another condition, not I'm giving you a divorce on the condition that you do not marry Chaim Yankel. Over here, he's giving her an opposite kind of a scenario. I'm giving you a divorce on the condition that you will marry Chaim Yankel. Is that valid or not? So here we're holding Tonu Rabbanon, the second line from the top in Daf Pei Dalet. Tonu Rabbanon. What happens if a person gives a get to his wife and he says, I'm giving you this get on the condition that you marry this particular person. We'll call him Chaim Yankel. So the din is she must not get married. And if she did, she does not have to leave that marriage. So this is a very general statement. What does this mean? She shouldn't get married. And if she does, she doesn't have to leave the marriage. What does that mean? So here the Gemara has your question. My Komar, what does this mean? What does this Braisa mean by giving this particular prohibition lichatchila, and post facto it's okay, she could remain in the marriage? Does it mean basically not to marry Chaim Yankel or not to marry anybody? Is this get invalid for anybody or just for Chaim Yankel? Rav Nachman says, Rav Nachman, here is what the pshat is. Hochi komar. This is what the Braisa means to say. Hareizu loy tenose loy. She must not marry him, Chaim Yankel. Why? Because there's a particular fear and concern that the Chachamim had. So this is basically a gezeda that the Chachamim made. Why did they make a gezeda? Shema yoimru, lest people will say neshehen noisnin b'matona. That they're basically, it looks very despicable and degrading. It looks like, oh, they're gifting their wives one to the other. He's divorcing her in order for her to marry Chaim Yankel. And in continuing to do so, it looks like he basically gave her away to someone else, which is obviously unbefitting and despicable. So that's what Rab Nachman explains it to me. But if she does get married post facto to someone else, loy seitze, she does not have to leave that marriage. Why? Because the concern is, do you give the condition that the Baal made a certain validity and credence? After all, the Baal the husband did make a condition that you marry Chaim Yankel. So to marry Chaim Yankel is unbefitting because it looks like they're gifting their wives to one another. Not to marry Chaim Yankel would mean that she didn't fulfill the condition that the get was given with, which may make her still an Eishes Ish, which may invalidate the get. Says Rav Nachman that the pshat in the Braisa is v'im nisis la'acher. If she does end up getting married to someone else, not to Chaim Yankel, loy seitze, she does not have to leave the marriage, even though ideally, conceptually, it would have been befitting to that the second husband should divorce her because she can't fulfill the original condition. The original condition was to marry Chaim Yankel, and this guy's Bedel Shmedel. She's married to Bedel Shmedel. As long as Bedel Shmedel doesn't give her a get, she cannot marry Chaim Yankel and validate or end up keeping the original condition. But post facto, loy seitze v'im lisas loy seitze. Okay, here the Gemara has a little bit of a problem with Rab Nachman's pshat on the Braisa. Oh, really? Mishum gzeida loy mafkinan minei. Really? Just because the Chachamim make this gzeida, that they're concerned that it may appear as if they're giving their wives away. We tell her not to leave him. We tell her not to leave this second marriage. V'shorinon eishes ish la'alma, and we're going to permit her, who technically is still considered married to the first one because the condition has not been met, and she could remain married to others. The condition has not been met, which means the get should technically be nullified, be bottled. What's going on over here? That's what Rashi says. Rather, Rav Nachman, so to say, tweaks what he said before. He goes back on the statement he made originally because of this question, because there's a questionable issue over here. Ella Rav Nachman, rather, says Rav Nachman as follows: Hochi komar. This is what the Braisa means to say. Areizu loy tenose loy. She must not marry Chaim Yankel, the one who he said, I'm giving you the get and condition you marry. So this Chaim Yankel, she must not marry. Shema Yomdu, for the reason we said before, because they may say Neshehen Noisnin b'matona, that they give their wives away as a present, so to say. Oh, you want my wife? Here, I'll divorce her on the condition that she marry you. No problem. But v'im nisas loy, if she does end up marrying this Chaim Yankel, loy seitze, she need not leave. The mishum gzeida loy mafkinon, because of the gzeida, says Rav Nachman, since the issue is a gzeida, a decree, that it may look as if they're giving their wives away one to another. This gzeida is not strong enough to make her have to leave the marriage. So here we see the condition has been met, so it doesn't invalidate the get. What's left is the gzeida of the Chachamim, that it doesn't look right. It looks like they're giving their wives one to another. This particular gzeida would not apply in this case. In other words, as far as having to leave the marriage because of. But the Gemara still is not at peace with this explanation. Specifically, Rav challenges Rav Nachman. Omar le Rav, says Rav to Rav Nachman. Basically, according to your opinion, what comes out is that loy, who the loy to know say.
They're all open?
There's some noise going on. Okay.
Someone asked.
No, there's a conversation going
No,
on.
that's true. No, don't, just shut the sound off. Are you asking a question there? Are you asking a question?
Well, I think everybody needs to mute. Leavy
Yeah.
is
Okay,
not
that's
muted.
Sorry.
Rabbi Marla, you're on mute.
There we go.
Okay, they have-
Okay, I think they're not gonna.
you hear me now? I don't hear you. Do you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess you haven't muted yourself. Anyway, says Rava to Rav Nachman. Rava challenges Rav Nachman. Basically, what you just said over here is that loy to this person to Chai Biankel, who the loy to nose, hola acher to nose. Says Rava, according to you, when it says loy to nose loy to this particular person to Chai Biankel, she may not get married. Ha la acher to nose, but to someone else she may marry. Right? That's lechatchila. But how could that be? Does she not have to fulfill the condition in order for the get to be a valid one and not become batal? How do we learn pshat lechatchila when you say harei zakitechal menashe tenase leploni harei zuloi tinose? She should not marry, and if she does, she doesn't have to go out. Right? The condition wasn't fulfilled. According to Rav Nachman, he said harezu loy tenase loy. She must not get married to Chaim Yankel. But if you don't make her leave. How could lichatchila you agree that she would not have to marry Chaim Yankel when the condition has not been met? So the get potentially is batal. V'chi similar to the argument you have with else.
Shemeshan the Machar. Here, she knows this say when she has to marry that guy. What happens if she got married to someone else for a year and then got divorced? What happens if she marries someone else for 10 years? She technically until the day she dies, she can always go and marry the next
Right.
person.
Okay. All right. So we're not stuck on a timeline. L'mocher 24 hours and 2 seconds later. L'mocher means
So then the
subsequently the Tanai will be fulfilled, and therefore, in retrospect, the get is not bottled. Once the Tanai is fulfilled, she ended up fulfilling the Tanai. So there was nothing to be mavatal to get. She may have not done it in the first 6 hours or 6 days, but ultimately the get was fulfilled, the Tanai.
Right, this one for 20 years and kids.
Okay, that's
Then you're looking back like, wait,
but 1 second. The Gemara has Rava says
she's living
even
in
though it
in
appears
Twilight Zone for 20 years.
Rava has another problem with this. Rava says even though it appears to be a similar argument, but hachi hashta, how could you compare? Actually, these two situations are not comparable. Hassam over there in the case where the guy says, I must not sleep today. If I sleep tomorrow, b'didei kaima, it is within his control whether or not he's going to fulfill the condition. The boy, if he wants, mavriz nafshe b'silvaso. He could stick himself with thorns. See, by the way, when it comes to sticking, you have to stick only yourself, not other people. There were minhagim of going around with smelling salt. People who would fall asleep during a shir, during davening, during a lecture. The gabbai would go around with smelling salt and wake the guy up. But it wouldn't be with thorns. I don't recall any story with the thorns. But for himself, he could stick himself with thorns and prevent himself from falling asleep. So it is with his control, v'loy noim, and he will not sleep. Hacha versus in our case, when it comes to marrying, divorcing, and marrying the correct person, bidido kaima ligrusha, is it in her control? Is she? There's a second party involved over here. Is it totally within her control to get divorced? How could you permit her to marry Bedel Shmedel when in fact Bedel Shmedel is going to have to be the one agreeing to divorce her? Shouldn't she have to marry Chaim Yankel first and not risk it? Therefore, Rava explains the Braisa differently. Ella Amar Rava, rather, Rava says, Loi to Nasi. What does she should not get married? What does the Braisa mean to say by this? Loi, v'loi lacher. Not to him, not to anybody else. To no one. No marriage going on over here. Loi to Nasi. To him, meaning to Chaim Yankel, she could not get married to Shema Yoimru, because they may say, Neshoseim, Noislim b'matona, that they give their wives away as a present, which is inappropriate and despicable. La'achid loitanose, to someone else, she must not get married. The baoye, the kiyuma litanor, because at the end of the day, she has to fulfill the condition for the get to be completely valid. And if the condition is not met, then the get is not valid. V'imnisis, however, in other words, is not lechatchila valid in the best way. However, post facto, v'imnisis loi, if she does end up getting married to Chaim Yankel loi seitze, she must not leave. She does not have to leave the marriage. Mishum gzeira loi mafkinon, for the reason of this decree that the Chachamim made, that it appears as if you're giving your wife away to someone else. True, that's a legitimate decree and concern. However, that's only lechatchila. But the evid post facto, if it has been done, they don't dismantle, they don't force the marriage to discontinue. However, la'acher, if she ends up getting married to someone else, the Bedel Shmedel, Teitze, she must leave that marriage, the boy of the cumulative to know, because she must fulfill the condition stipulated by the husband for the get to be a get.
I don't really see why that is, because they're divorced. The husband has no power over her anymore.
But they're not, that's the question. Does the divorce actually take place, being that the divorce had a condition? There was a stipulation over there.
Okay.
And being that the stipulation was not met, there's a concern whether or not the get is valid. That's why,
Wow.
if she marries someone else, concludes Rava, she actually has to go out. Talking about Tanai, talking about conditions and stipulations being made, the Gemara is going to go into various different stipulations which seemingly have a halachic restriction, but not necessarily a physical one. Would that be considered an acceptable Tanai, an acceptable condition that has to be adhered to or that carries weight? Or do we say, no, that's a condition. What are you talking about? How can you make such a condition? No, nullified. Tonu Rabbanon, Hareze Gitech, Al Manas Shetali Lurakia. Not only a halachic problem, there's also physical problems with certain conditions, which may also pose as a problem for the condition to have any validity whatsoever, and we'll address that as well. Actually, we're going to address that now first. He says to his wife, here's your get, and the condition that you're going to go to the sky, right? You'll jump over the moon, basically. Or, almanas sheteid di latohim, or that you go down into the abyss, right? You take a trip down, and when you're halfway through the globe, towards the Indian Ocean, you start to the other side of the globe. Then the divorce will kick in, okay? Or almanash tivli kone shel arba amis, or in the condition that you swallow a rod the size of 4 amis, basically only 6 feet. Or almanash tivli kone ben mea am, or that you bring me a rod, I guess a naturally growing one, the size of 100 amas. Or the condition that you travel you travel the Mediterranean Sea, you go over it by foot. Obviously, ain't no get. It's not a get. Why? Because it's impossible to fulfill this condition. Maybe I'll be over the moon when the divorce happens, but I can't jump over the moon for the divorce to happen. Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says, Kozer get. Actually, even if the condition, the stipulation has not been met, it is a valid get, says Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. And the Braisa continues, Klal Omar Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. This is a rule. Klal, remember this word. The rule of Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema is that kol tonight, any condition which could not be met at the end, and yet the husband made that condition while giving the divorce, it is not considered only like someone who's taunting her with words that don't have any validity. Vikoshe, and the get still in all is valid. The get is valid, as Rashi points out. In other words, since it's known that this condition could not be met, we could safely assume and understand that the husband he can't be serious that the get should be met, that this tonight should be met, but he just wants to taunt her. He wants her to think, there's a condition over here that you could never fulfill, and therefore, basically, your get is not obtainable. No sure. You just made it tonight. He didn't make her swear. He said, I'm giving this to you in the condition that you're going to jump to the sky. He's not mashpia her. No, he doesn't make a shvua himself either. He just made a tanai. That's what Rab Yehuda ben Tema says. Okay, so Om Rav Nachman Omar Rav here concludes. In other words, Rav Nachman Omar Rav comes with a conclusive decision with these machlokesen. Halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. The halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. In other words, that if he taunts her with these various tanoim conditions which are impossible to be met, the get is a get nonetheless. Omer Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok, however, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok says, Masnisin nami daiko. Actually, you could deduce this from the Mishnah. From the Mishnah, there's a Mishnah above Metzia that says, the Ktonim, kol she'ef shaloi l'kaimoi b'soifoi, any condition which can be met at the end, v'hisna olav b'tchilosoi, and he made this condition to begin with. In other words, a reasonable condition which can be met, t'noi kayam. Then the condition remains, which means you have to meet that condition in order for whatever transaction needs to be taking place to be valid. But if it's impossible to fulfill that condition, then the stipulation is nullified. The t'nai is undone. So from here, we clearly have a raya in support of Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. Okay, so in light of what we just learned, that what Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says, that any stipulation which is reasonable has to be kept. Any stipulation which is not reasonable does not have to be kept. In other words, it's not possible, it does not have to be kept. Now let's see, based on this, what does reasonable mean? Let's take it to the next level. The question was posed of them. In other words, it was a question that the Talmidim had, and they posed this question. What happens if he gives a get to his wife and he says, this is your divorce document, your get, one condition, that you have a little bit of pork. You have some pork chops. Mahu, what is the din? In other words, is this condition an acceptable one? In other words, does it exist, or is it considered nullified? Because what do you mean? Eating chazir? Are you kidding? Amr Abaye, says Abaye, he. This is literally the case of Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema that we just learned, and it's considered a tanai which cannot be met, and it's nullified. It doesn't exist because you can't eat pork. So it's as if he's telling her, in other words, just like you physically can't jump to the sky, you also al pitoida cannot eat chazir, and therefore it's the same. It's one of the same. Physically, spiritually, unable to do something is one of the same. He. That's what Rava says. Excuse me. That's what Abaye says. Says Rava to Abaye, no. Shocking, but true. Rava is arguing with Abaye. Rava says, Efsher the ochla v'lakya. What do you mean? It's physically possible for her to eat the chazer, for her to eat pork, and to get malchus for it. It's her choice. She could go through, you do the crime, you do the time, and that's it. It's her choice. So it's considered a tanai, which is fulfillable, which can be met. And in this case, perhaps Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema would agree that the tanai does remain, and it's a sticking point. Now, the Gemara, explains both. There's a common denominator between Abaye and Rava over here. as far as explaining what Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema means or doesn't mean. Le Abaye, according to Abaye, this that Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says, klal, remember I said, klal omer Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema sets a rule. So according to Abaye, what does klal, this rule, in the words of Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, la suye, it comes to include besar chazir. If he tells her, yeah, here's your divorce and the condition that you eat pork, it's considered impossible. You cannot fulfill it, and therefore the Tanai is not taken seriously. The divorce is accepted, and the Tanai is not. Le Rava, but according to Rava, Poseh, like this. You see, in the first, right before klal, you see it says Poseh get, right? Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says Poseh get before in the case where he tells her if you know like if you jump to the moon, if you go to the sky, if you cross the river by foot. So he says Poseh, even if the Tanai cannot be met, get, it's still a get. So Abaye says klal, where the get cannot be met, where the Tanai cannot be met, it's still a get. Rava would say Poseh, like this, limu'ute besar chazir, would come to exclude the condition in that he made that you're going to eat chazir. If you eat chazir, that the get will be a valid get. Over here, it's not considered a Tanai because it's impossible. Because get, it's still considered a good get because it's impossible to eat chazir.
So really, Abaye and Rav actually agree with Yehuda ben Tema. It's just on the
where it's applied. Where it's applied. Rabbi would say the kazeh applies also to the chazir, not only to jumping to the moon.
This is Yehuda ben Tema, Ratzker.
Yeah. Yeah. Kiber Kari, Skaber Kari. Yeah. Okay. Huh?
Rabba's teacher, was he his teacher?
No, this is, huh? This is Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. No.
He was a Tana.
Okay. Anyway, Mesave. So now the Gemara. Oh, he just visited him.
Yeah.
So the Gemara asks a question on Rava. Mesave. They ask the question on Rava. What happens if he gives his wife a get and he says, Al manas shetiboyali lepleni. I'm giving you a get on the condition that you have relations with so and so. Whether it's illicit relations or married, she gets married to him. Rashi points out, Rashi says, Bein biznus, bein b'nesuin. He makes that condition. Niskayim Tanai, how does it get? If the Tanai is fulfilled, then in retrospect, the get is fulfilled. V'im lav, and if not, einoi get, it's not a get. Now, it continues. This brayso continues. Al menas sheloi tibo ali la'aba u'la'avich. I'm giving you a get on the condition that you do not have relations with my father or with your father. Ein chosheshin. Here we're not concerned. Shema nivola lehen, that she ended up having relations with them, and she could marry anybody else. There's no issue. We're not afraid that maybe today she had relations with one of them, or she will have relations with one of them, and the get is going to be batal, and therefore she subsequently may not marry anybody else. So over here, there's a particular Tanai, right? There's a particular condition that the Braisa has. I'm divorcing you on the condition that you will have relations with so and so. So we see the ilu, however, here we see that in the case, in other words, they don't bring an example of a case where he says, I'm giving you a get that you do have relations with my father or your father. Here the Braisa does not mention such a case, which means over here clearly the Tanai would be nullified. Why? Because you are prohibited from fulfilling it, which means Lefi Abaye, so according to Abaye rather, Niche, it makes sense. Because Abaye said, if you're not allowed to eat chazer, the Tanai is off. The Tanai is not a Tanai, and you proceed with enjoying the get. But the Rava, according to Rava, who said, if you recall, Rava said, yeah, she could eat pork and get flogged for it. No problem, it's in her choice. According to Rava, kasha. It's a question, why don't we find this type of a Tanai being used as an example? According to Rava, if she could proceed to do that which is halachically unacceptable, why don't we find this Tanai being used as an example? So the Gemara answers, Omar lach Rava, says Rava, no, you can't bring a question from this because the two cases do not compare. You can't compare eating pork and having relations with her father. Bish Shloima B'sad Chazir.
The other one that she could control herself from someone else.
Bish Shloima B'sad Chazir. When it comes to the stipulation that he makes with her, the tonight that he makes with her that she should eat Chazir, Efshe the Ochle V'Lakia. Like we said before, it's possible for her to eat and get malchus for it. Ploini Nami. So too, the condition that you marry so and so, it's also possible for that to take place. Efsher the Meshachada Bei Bimamoina. It's possible that she could always, give him money to get married to her. In other words, if he doesn't want to have this illicit relationship with her, she could still pay him, or either that he should marry her or whatever it is. There is something that she could do to make it work out. Ella, Abba v'avich b'didah kaima. When it comes to her father or his father, is it dependent on her? Nihi the ihi of the isura. Even if she would want to transgress a prohibition in order to fulfill the condition. Abba v'avich mi of the isura. His father or her father, do you think they'll be willing to do this prohibition? So, being that it's not dependent on her, eating pork is as easy as, sticking the fork in and eating it and paying the price, but it's easy because it's within her control, within her realm. But over here, it's totally out of her realm. So over here, we must say that in this case, Rava would agree that it's considered a stipulation that would be impossible to fulfill. And therefore, the Tanai is bottled. The Tanai is nullified.
So with Chazer, it's not nullified, but with prohibited relationship, it is bottled.
So it depends by who.
Yeah,
By Rava.
yeah, because the other one is not technically, it's not prohibited. She's not married, so it's not. There's a get over there, so it's not prohibited on that level. Her to have relations with her father is prohibited. Period. Obviously. Now, so based on what we said before, now we can understand what Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says, both according to Rava and according to Abaye. Li Rava klal. So according to Rava, what does klal omar, right? Ben Tema. What does it mean? La suye comes to include Abba va'ovich, my father or your father. That's also considered a Tanai, which is impossible to be fulfilled. Because when he says in such a case, limaute, it comes to exclude besar chazer, that it's not considered a Tanai, which is impossible to be fulfilled because it's within her control. That's what Rava would say. Abaye, but according to Abaye, klal, what does this expression klal come to la'asuye, come to include? Basar chazir, pork chops. In other words, this is considered a condition which cannot be met. So kozeh means limu'ute. In other words, kozeh, that's what klal means. Kozeh, and what does kozeh come to clarify? It comes to clarify limu'ute ploini. It comes to clarify that if he makes a condition that I will give you a get in order that you have relations with so and so, that is considered an acceptable condition which can be met. It's not impossible. So in this case, Rava would say that it is considered a Tanai because technically there is no issue, there's no relations with the father issue, and therefore technically it can be met because she could convince him either with money. It's technically within her control. Okay, so now if that's the case, there's still a question. There's still unfinished business, unresolved business. The Gemara asks a question now on Abaye. Meisvei, 1 second. Based on what Abaye says, that a condition which halachically may not be done is not considered a condition. Excuse me, a condition which halachically can be done, cannot be done. It is considered a condition because she could proceed with going ahead and doing it and getting malchus. Here, I'm giving you a get, the husband says, on the condition that you eat chaver, you eat pork chops. And or let's say she was not a bas kohen. She was not a bas kohen, which means she cannot eat truma. He's giving her a get almanas shetoichli b'truma, on the condition that you help yourself with a few mouthfuls of truma. Or if she was a nazir, you know what a nazir is, right? Someone who must not cut the hair, drink wine, etc. Right? Nazira. You know, there's a story I heard. Shmuel Levittin was there were a few gedolim or Rosh Hashivas that went to Chiddush the Rebbe, or maybe it was by Nicham Avelim with the Rebbe. And as they were going in, he asked them a question: could a lady be a nazir? I said it's a pasuk. Isha. He has a nazir. The nazir. In other words, the pasuk says a man or a woman could be a nazir. So over here, Nizira Albanas Shetishtiyayin. He gives her a get in the condition that she drink wine. Niskai matanai, and as a get. If the condition is met, the get is a get. V'im lav ain't a get, and if not, the get is not a get.
Get malchus, but she got her get.
But lerava, according to Rava, that says a tanai that you're not supposed to fulfill is considered a tanai nicha, because she could eat and get the malchus. La Abaye, but according to Abaye, it's not a tanai kasha. This brayse is very, very difficult according to Abaye's opinion. For Abaye says where the tanai is not supposed to be done, it's not considered a tanai. Here, this brayse clearly says, let's say if she was a nazira, and the condition was she has to have wine, or if she was a zara, she was not a bas kohen, and the condition was that she has to have truma. If she does it, if she transgresses something in the Torah and fulfills the tanai, the get is a get. Anything short of that does not allow the get to be a get. What's going on over here? It makes sense according to Rava, who says she could eat pork and get malchus, so it's within her control. But Abaye says, one second, if it's halachically unacceptable, the tanai is never a tanai. Over here, it seems that the tanai very much is a tanai. Omer Abaye. Omer Abaye means Abaye will answer. Had Abaye been around, he would have answered the following: Me Savris, do you think that this Braisa is talking about everyone's opinion? Divrei HaKoilhi? It's everyone. No. Homani. Who does this Braisa go in accordance with? Rabbonon he. The Rabbonon, who argue on Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. They argue on Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, and they hold that the Tanai does kick in even if you could not fulfill it. And according to that, there certainly is certainly is a validity to a Tanai which can be met. It's just halachically prohibited. They say if he says you have to jump to the moon in order for the get to be a get, the Tanai is considered a Tanai, according to them, which means basically saying, okay, if you can't do that, the get can't take place either. So if that's the case, that's the Rabbanon arguing on Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, and they say that the Tanai is met even if it cannot take place. So according to that, how much more so if you're not supposed to do it? If you're not supposed to do it, the Tanai, meaning halachically, the Tanai certainly is relevant, and therefore it would depend if she transgresses this halachic prohibition of not having wine, for instance, then the get would be a get, according to the Rabbanon. That's what this Bryce is quoting. Clear?
I feel like in today's vernacular, if someone says that I will give you this get on tonight that you'll send to the sky or something like that, it's as if it's like impossible to get a get.
Right.
It's as if saying-
So basically, according to the Rabbanon,
it just
the
means like you
Tanai,
don't get it. That's just
the
what it
Tanai
means.
carries weight. Whatever the Tanai is, as ridiculous as it is, if it's a Tanai, being that it was stipulated, it carries weight. How much more so if it's only a halachic prohibition, where physically it can be done.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
the point over here.
Would they like beat the stipulation out of them?
Where they
Because
would try to convince them otherwise, maybe, but that's a whole separate.
Yeah, right.
That's a whole separate discussion.
Rennie's saying that you could just take an airplane,
I don't believe he said it. You heard him?
Yeah, unless I hear it from his own mouth, I don't hear it. I don't believe it.
And you kind of.
Anyway, the Tapuk lay. That's why the second case was made that you cross the sea by foot, not by boat. Right. So that's why certain clarifications were made that the first case should not be misunderstood. The Tapuk lay. However, the Gemara asks, 1 second, you can't make a condition, you can't make a Tanai with regard to something that you cannot fulfill. Because even though, let's say he's going to make a condition that you eat pork or you drink wine if you're a Nazira. The Tapuk lay, the Masnal Mashakosa Batoida, let us say that 1 second over here. He's making a condition, a stipulation, based on what pre-exists in the Torah as prohibited. And if you do that, if you make a stipulation, if you make a condition based on what it says in the Torah, and the Torah prohibits it, your Tanai, your condition is nullified, doesn't carry any weight from the get-go. So even though physically she could eat the pork, she could drink the wine, she could eat the truma, halachically it's unacceptable. Therefore, the Tanai never kicks in. Tanai bottle. So what's going on over here? Omar Rav Ado Bereid Rav Ike. The Gemara answers, says Rav Ado, the son of Rav Ike, Kiyam Rinon. What do we say? When do we mean that masna al mashakasa batoyda Tanai bottle? That if you make a condition, if you make a stipulation, which runs against the Torah rule, it becomes nullified. Kigoin, for instance, let's say he betroths a woman, says, I'm going to marry you, and the condition that she'eda ksusa va'inasa, right? Supporting you, right, with food or garments or relations are not going to be taking place. And the Torah clearly says, she'eda ksusa va'inasa lo yigda. You must entertain that. The huka'aka over here, he is nullifying that. He is uprooting a din in the Torah
And it's not-
via his stipulation, and therefore no can do from the get-go. Aval hacha, but over here, when the husband makes a condition that
He didn't do anything.
the get, right, that the get will be if she transgresses something, ihi ka'okra. She is the one who uproots, who transgresses a din in the Torah.
She
So-
doesn't have to do it.
So, right. So he is not making a condition against the Torah. In other words, he is not doing something on his own. He's not making a tanai that what says in the Torah for himself. He's not doing it. She ends up doing it. But here the Gemara says, "What do you mean? That's an answer." Maskif lo Rabino. Rabina asks on this answer, "Klum ka'okra ihi elu l'kumil tonight today." What do you mean? Yeah, she proceeds to eat the pork because of his condition, to entertain, to satisfy his tanai, his condition. That's where it was conceived. Ishtakach di'iu ka'akar, and therefore what comes out is that he's actually making the tanai. He's actually uprooting a din in the Torah, so his tanai should be nullified. It shouldn't kick in to begin with. Therefore, Ravina proceeds to explain it differently. He begs to differ. He says, "Ki kamridon masna al mashakos b'Torah tanai bottle." When do we say the rule? When does this rule that if someone makes a condition based on a uprooting a rule of the Torah, and it goes against the Torah, that the Tanai is bottled, the Tanai is nullified? Going, for instance, if someone betroths the woman and he says, here, I'm not going to support you in any of the above mentioned ways. No Sheida Ksusa Nasa. The Vadai Ka'oka. Here, he is most certainly uprooting, right? He's uprooting a din in Torah. The Torah clearly says, Sheida Ksusa Nasa Lo Yigra, and here he is clearly uprooting that. Going against Torah.
So he's saying that this rule of Masna Mashkas Basara, he's adding a clause to it.
He's clearly uprooting it by making that condition. Aval versus over here, when he says, if you eat pork chops, it'll kick in. Is he telling her that that it's impossible that you should not eat? In other words, you must. It's impossible for you not to end up eating chazir. He's not forcing her.
Divorce.
What?
Don't get divorced.
Lo yiseichel, lo yisigarish. Don't eat and don't get divorced. It's in your hands. So he didn't force her. He didn't stipulate in the way that it actually forces her to do it. And in this case, it's not considered a masna al mashakosa b'Torah. He makes a stipulation based on a prohibition of the Torah, so it's not bottled. It's not nullified. Okay, now we're going back to the Mishnah, where the Chacham say they nullify a get, they nullify a get document that doesn't permit the woman to proceed to marry. Ketzad Yasa, what should he do? Yitla himenu. In other words, he would have to once again take back the get. If you recall, this is in the Mishnah. I didn't realize time is running out. Time flies when you're having fun. What? Rennie screams otherwise. Ketzad Yasa Yitlena himenu. What should you do? You must take it back from her and give it to her without those conditions. Just saying you're permissible to everyone. Mantona, who's the one who said this din that you would have to take it back and be given to her? The Tanya, because we learned he has to take it back from her and re-give it to her. And say, hey, Gittich, Here is your divorce document. Period. No strings attached. Rabbi Yochanan says, he argues, is afilu tema Rebbe. You could even say that our Mishnah is in accordance with Rebbe. That you don't need why? Because dilchoin, because you're chacham. What does dilchoin mean? You're Rav Kana. Rav Kana, because many cases dilchoin is Rav Kana that came from Bavel, and typically the Gemara would refer to Rav Kana as dilchoin. Your chacham who came from Bavel. Omar says shani hacha, that this case is different from the Mishnah. Hoyel ukna asu the apostle boy likuhuna, being that he, in other words, she received the get. Round one, she already became disqualified from proceeding to marry a kohen. There's a certain level of divorce from round one, and being that she merited the get on that level, therefore he could not continue to say, "Oh, okay, you can marry whoever you want," unless he takes it back and he gives it to her a second time. Okay, the Mishnah concludes by saying, "Ksavoi." What happens if he writes? He makes an exclusion over there. He says, "You may marry only this and this person." If it's actually written in the get itself, even though he proceeds to erase it, we said it's possible. Rav Safra says, Rav Safra, if, in other words, as far as writing it in the get, in the actual get, Tanan, we learned the Mishnah saying that he actually has to write it in the get, and once that takes place, there is no correction via erasing it. But if he didn't write it in the get, if he just verbalized it to the Eidim, by the way, I'm giving this get only on the condition that she, whatever it is, she marries only this, or she doesn't marry this and this person, then the get does not become disqualified. And if he gives her a get and he says you're permissible to everybody, she's divorced. Okay? So the Gemara says, Pshita, what do you mean? That's Pashut. It's Pashut that we learned in the Mishnah, he wrote it in the get. You know, what he didn't verbalize it, he wrote it. What are you adding? Now, because I would have thought, when are these words said? That if he says this orally, verbally, in the get, regarding the get, when la'achar hatoyif, after the main part of the get was written, her name, you know, that's what toyif is. All of the time, her name, you know, those are the main parts of the get. However, if it was done before the toyif was written, I feel al peh nami posel, even if he said it verbally, it may disqualify it, because the toyif, the main part of the get, was written subsequently and in condition of what was verbalized before. Kamash Milan. So this comes to teach us otherwise. It is not the case. Even if he said it before he wrote the main part of the get, it is nonetheless kosher if he takes it from her and gives it to her and says that it's you're permissible to everyone. Rav Amar, however, Rav argues and says lo shanu elo la'achar hatoyif. No, only if he writes it after the main part of the get. But if he says it before the main part of the get was written, afilu al peh nami posel, even if he said it, if he verbalized it, then write it, it's still disqualified. And Rava has a reason. He goes in accordance with his reasoning. The Omar, because Rava would say, or he did say, there was a case where he said to those who write Gittin, Shasku shesuki lebal, make the Baal quiet. In other words, make sure he doesn't stipulate any tonight. Ad the kasvitu leila toidef dikitu, until you finish writing the toidef, that main part, her name, the time, etc. of the get, which is considered the toidef. Make sure that he zips it. Make sure that he's as noisy as Dr. Stein. Ton Rabbanon. The Rabbanon learned kol atnoin poislim to get all of the conditions disqualify a get if they were written inside of it. Divrei Rebbe. That's what the Rebbe says. The Chacham say kol shepoisel al peh poisel b'ksav. Whatever disqualifies verbally, disqualifies in the written form. The whole sheini poisel al peh, whatever does not disqualify verbally, eine poisel b'ksav does not disqualify in the written form. Chutz, with the exception of the following, that if he says chutz, with the exception of so and so, I'm divorcing you with the exception of being able to marry so and so. Shepoisel al peh, it disqualifies even if he verbalizes it, and poisel b'ksav, and it also disqualifies written. But if he says almanas in the condition they'll say chutz except, but he says in the condition that you do something or that sheini poisel al, it doesn't disqualify al peh, any poisel b'ksav. It doesn't disqualify verbally when it's being given, and any poisel it also does not disqualify in the written form. Rab Zeda says that Rab Zeda machlekes lefnei hatoilef. This whole machlekes is only before the main part of the get is written. The Rebbe saw because the Rebbe says gazrina and almanas otu. We make this gezeda. If he stipulates, if he makes a tanai, we say otu chutz. We say that it's disqualified because we're concerned that he also may say chutz. In other words, in the case where the get will have the clear verbalization of chutz, you're divorced with the exception of so and so. And that certainly is possible min haTorah. Therefore, almanas would also not be acceptable because it may lead to also accepting chutz, which is totally unacceptable min haTorah. But Rabbanan Savrei loy gazirina. Rabbanan say no, we don't make gzer almanas or to chutz. We're not concerned with that. But after the Torah, if divrei hakol kosher, everyone would say it is kosher. And we'll stop over here. Woo! Have a blessed, wonderful day. Let's leave.